Well, thank you too for joining us. I
Thank
appreciate you for the time.
Glad to be here, man. Thanks for having us.
Oh man, yeah, thank
Of
you
course.
so much.
Yeah, of course, of course. So I wanted to start the conversation off with this Anais Nin quote, or Anais Nin rather. And I felt like this resonated mostly because of the conversation that John and I had when we were talking about finding meaning out of all the rich experiences of life. And so there is not one big cosmic meaning for all. There is only the meaning we each give to our life, an individual meaning, an individual plot, like an individual novel, a book for every person. And I felt that that was poignant, to say the least. And yeah, and also, yeah, just that conversation we had the other day, John, you and I thought kind of resonated with all of that, and it resonated also with just your work and your body of work specifically. But to start the conversation, I know that Totems and Vessels celebrates your 5-year wedding anniversary, and I wanted to ask how you two met.
Oh,
Oh, that's a
that,
good one.
that is great. You want to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like okay. So when I first moved back from Italy, I did this show that's locally in town. I had been told to do it. I was living in Atlanta with my mom, and there was an art show. It was like an outdoor art show, and I ended up showing work there. I was totally out of place, but I had all these like kind of old, real academic portraits, real dark, and everything, and I was exhibiting them, and kind of that's one of those fair things where people just kind of walk through and you meet like 70 people in an hour. And there was this one painting I had put in that show that was like had this little moment where it was like me trying just like out of school, trying to do something sort of new and kind of a little bit more creative, I guess. And this one dude noticed it. And it was John. He was like, "Hey, that one piece is a little bit different. Like you got this thing going on that's real modern, this big streak of red." And I didn't ask his name or anything, but I wrote it down. I had this like notebook where I was writing stuff down to remember like people that had come through and just to sort of give myself these prompts. And so there's this one guy, and then I happened to come back to Chattanooga to do work, and lo and behold, the studio where I was looking to maybe set up, John was there. It was like this communal space. And he was like, "Hey, I met you." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, you're the guy who remembered." So it was like, it happened again and again. And then, I don't know, do you want to write on that, John? Because that's sort of like, it was always a little bit fuzzy.
Yeah, yeah. I think too. I think did you had you seen my work before we met in person?
Not really.
No. Okay. I think that I think the cool thing about it was at that time I was doing just it was complete like non-representational or abstract sculpture, and my brain and what I was drawn to was not really into figurative painting, very specific figurative painting. I mean, I'd studied it and certainly like really dug like some of the characters and some of what people did with it, like I mean, like historically, like Caravaggio and stuff like that, just as a character and what he did for art. Um, but like being drawn to her work for me was not. There was something completely out of my where I was at the time, where my headspace was at the time, and I always like kind of reflect on that there was, and this has continued in Mia's work for me is that there's like this rich soulfulness that transcends like so much of just like I guess it's so far beyond what is just the simplicity of what's being painted or just how it's painted. There's so much more depth to that, and that's what hit me at that time. And I was like, and I didn't. She wasn't around for me to see how smoking hot she is, so It wasn't like, I was like, man, definitely commenting on this chick's paintings, man. I didn't know who it was. So, but yeah, man. So that's kind of how, I don't know. I saw something like that was so rich in that was outside of the box for me.
Mm.
So through our art is how we met. Cause I had the same thing later. It's kind of the same situation, like saw this non-representational sculpture at this, again, another like festival. Both of us were kind of doing stuff like that. And we still didn't really know each other we weren't friends. We didn't have each other's phone numbers. There wasn't any of that kind of stuff. It's a small enough town where you bump into each other. And I had the same thing. I was like, wow, if I pay attention, like this work is so profound and kind of, just hits that a little bit more of a universal conversation that doesn't really matter what the medium is. And so that, drew me to John.
And what both drew you to living in Chattanooga?
You go.
So I grew up here, and I guess around when I was around 21, I moved away, went to school, and traveled a lot, and I stayed out of this area for 11 years, and a lot of things happened at once for me. Where I was living, I went to Millsaps in Jackson, Mississippi. It was a good experience there. I traveled there a whole lot. But it really kind of, for me, hit a place where I was kind of ready to move. I was really into, I was really into like kind of what we were talking about, Yoshino, before, about just a lot of interests. I was really into rock climbing. I was, living as an artist there. And so I found, my folks are still here in Chattanooga. So that was part of it as well. I guess for me, there was a part of me that was like, you hear so many people say, well, my folks are getting older and I want to have some time with them before they pass. And I was like, well, the hell with that. I want to like have some living with them now, so that was part of it. The rock climbing here is killer. The art community is cool. And it's a slow pace. I like being able to travel to cool places and live kind of slow, so that's a lot of it for me.
Yeah, I obviously I'm not from here, but I grew up in New York City and then in Atlanta. And so I was kind of used to big cities where you're kind of always anonymous, and there's something great about that. But I guess when I moved here, it was sort of by accident. Like I ended up getting work here and people started commissioning me and I was like, oh, okay. And everything was so inexpensive. Because it's a small Southern town, so I got a studio here for like, I think it was like $75 or something. I mean, it was so great. It was so like outside of my scope. And
$75 a day?
I know. I was like, that's what I did. I was like, a day of a week. Like I mean,
wait, how long ago was this? $75 a month?
It was like, I mean, we're talking like 14 years ago now. It's been a second, but still, I was used to like, okay, the minimum is like at the time $500, for a cheap studio. I mean, that was like on the bottom end. And getting work here after that festival, I had all these people wanting portraits of their kids or whatever. That's kind of what I was doing at the time. And it was this sweet studio in this old bank building with like marble terrazzo floors. And when they told me $75, I was like, okay, I'm going to try this because I don't really want to be like, bussing tables and, like I'd much rather be in an easel. And so and it's just been like a lovely place to live. Like John said, it's slow paced. It's easy. We own a house. Like we're two artists that own a house. I mean, I feel like that says something, you know what I mean? And it's just, the art community has grown here. And now we're actually like, I'm trying to keep it more of a secret because now people are buying up houses here. We have all these Californians that have moved here during the pandemic. And
those damn Californians.
I know, it's always the Californians that come and mess everything up with the economy.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, now we have lots of people, and we're like, ooh, now, we even have these two Ukrainian artists that got stuck here, during when the war started, and now they're just going to live here because they're like, this is amazing. They're like, we're just going to stay. So now they're just permanently trying to find residency in Chattanooga.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a cool place. It's sort of like a weird little, it's its
bubble,
own thing.
Little pocket.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful too, man. I mean, it's a really gorgeous place. I mean, if you like being outside, this place is awesome.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite things.
Yeah, man, it's so good. And it's not like, to be clear, like there's no $75 studios in this town anymore.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that is not like a subtle way to be like, don't come here. I'm definitely not doing that. It's a brilliant place to be. But it is like, I think that it's shit. Like when I moved back, I had the same experience. I had like this, place to work that was, it was really cheap and it was a really big place to work. It was amazing. There's still like, I guess like, what is it called? Like art groups that still have spaces here that are not terrible, but it's not like it was,
Yeah, no, totally.
What is it that David Byrne said not that long ago? He was like, all the artists have left New York.
Yeah.
They're in these kind of smaller places. I think there seems to be a lot, at least.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, especially because things are so open to being remote now. And if you can keep your costs of living as inexpensive as possible, you might as well, like I think like the most important thing for a creative person is to be able to have the time and the space. And if that alleviation of the pressures of needing to make a certain amount of money in order to support your lifestyle in like, say, Los Angeles or New York or, these big cities. I mean, I think that there's definitely a power for like networking and those sort of things, but now a lot of networking is done through like this, like through Zoom or online or through Instagram and Twitter. And so it just, things are a lot more open now than they were even 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. But to get into your guys' show, Totems and Vessels. So do you mind if I read the little paragraph that you two have for the show?
Yeah, sounds good.
Great.
Okay. Myths and totems. And I can't read. Let me start over. Myths, totems, and iconic imagery have been and continue to be a way that we sort through and identify our experiences. This happens for us on an individual level as well as collective communal belief structures. Vessels are also metaphors for a place to put our hopes and love, as well as a place of safety and rest. This work creates glimpses and doors for the view to find their own totems, myths, and sanctuary. And so I know you two had a duo exhibition 5 years ago at the same gallery. Is that correct? At Robert Lang?
Yeah. Yep.
And so I was wondering since then how the collaboration between you two has grown and what ways is it different, but also what ways has it stayed the same?
Oh, man.
I feel like you changed the most, John. You should probably go first.
That's
if you want.
That's good. So at that time, I was doing still just specifically abstract sculpture, and really started moving more into oil painting as well. And so for me, it was a huge shift. I think one of the really cool things, and this is just kind of how it is, that throughout our friendship, because we were friends we were both like complete commitment phobes. So it took us about 5 years to start actually dating after we became friends. And And, through all that time, it's like a lot of like, bouncing ideas. I always have valued deeply what Mia thought. And she is a person who I've always gone to talk about what I was doing with sculpture. There's a lot of stuff that I wouldn't necessarily be able to articulate as to why specifically, but that's always been kind of a fact. So the shift has happened, that has remained, but then there's like a technical shift that's happened, like talking about painting, as I've really leaned into that, that's become part of the conversation as well. Like when we would like get together with artist friends, and it was, in particular, like, a lot of other painters, there'd be this like technical talk that I'd just be like, well, I'm gonna, kind of, my gaze kind of subtly drifts out the window, because I don't know what the hell they're talking about. And now that's that's a part of our discussion too, so I think that would probably be some of the stuff that I could talk about. Just that there's more specifics that have added to it now that I'm also working at a medium that Mia's working in. But the discussion of like, the critiques of each other's work when one of us asks for it, the bouncing ideas of what we're trying to go for and everything like that has always been like a pretty big part of our lives, throughout all of our lives together.
Yeah. I think that's really good. I think too, like, given, there's something that changes. Like we got married a week after we had that show 5 years ago, which I don't recommend to anybody to do a 2-person show and get married the same week. But
bad idea.
Yeah. But I also think like, it's a horrible idea. And we had lots of things happen on top of that, but,
destination wedding on an island.
Yeah.
a week after a joke. So.
Wow.
Cars getting stolen, people falling off the docks. Yeah, all of it. But so
people falling off the docks.
Oh,
literally.
Man.
I mean, we could spend this entire podcast telling you the story of our wedding, because I had to, like, one of my closest friends when we got back, her and I had dinner, and I was like, you're going to need a couple glasses of wine because this is a really long story. And I am truly not one of those people trying to one up you of like, oh, my dress ripped or whatever. I was like, but literally it was a shit show.
It was epic. I mean, it was epic. I don't think either of us regret actually like the ceremony part of it itself, but the whole, like, if stuff that you couldn't fathom being an issue it was just amazing. And I'm not talking like small issues like our house getting broken into, Mia's car getting stolen, my car breaking down, wedding planner falling off the dock into the intercoastal waterway, all like the wedding, like boxes of wedding stuff. Imagine just being on a dock and watching all the wedding supplies just kind of floating gracefully down the intercoastal waterway, just brilliant. So we have to have a boat to get to the island, and the boat breaks down. I'm still traumatized by it. This is still sensitive for me, Yoshino.
At the time, did you two think that this was some sort of like omen or premonition?
No,
we had been together for so long. We're like, if we can get through this, we're gonna be good for actual marriage, because neither of us was like into the wedding part. Honestly, when I see like wedding ads come up, I'm like, oh. I look away. Like, we weren't into the event itself, and so we were like, if we can get through all of this crap from the jump, then you kind of know, like, all right, we're walking through some like pretty dense stuff, So, but that's actually to write on like what I was going to say is, in 5 years of being married, because there is something, however you decide to do it. I mean, I know marriage isn't for everybody, but like just that partnership, and like a profound growth in it. I think at least for me, that has been the thing that has changed even more and become like a sort of tighter web of communication and love and understanding, is like, that's probably even just built on itself in 5 years that we already had a lot of, but so that would, for me, that's the biggest actual change from the 5 years ago show that we did to now is just the growth in that.
And how long ago, or how long were you two friends before you decided to be in a relationship and then get married?
I think it was like 5 or 6 years, quite a while. We were just, I mean, unfortunately, we know each other's exes.
We know everything, dude. Like everything that there is to know, because we got to be really close friends, you know.
Yeah.
And then she like made out with me one night, and we're married.
Is that how it worked, Mia?
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Yeah, maybe I'm romanticizing your both your relationships, but this sounds very much like a Joan Didion and John Gregory Dunn, you know, in terms of like critiquing the critiquing of the work and, you know, being there for each other through kind of like the thick and thin of it all. I also just read The Year of Magical Thinking, so that's been on the top of my mind.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. I haven't finished that, but it's a really great book.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
I think there is some to that, though. I mean, it is brilliant, and I mean, I'm kind of a little like I'm a little shy just because it's like, you know, personal stuff, but also just I'm not a person who ever thought like I'd be in this situation. There's a saying that you hear, like things like this happen when you're not looking for them, and I'm like, man, I think way too much for that kind of stuff, you know. And here, you know, it happened, you know, so it is kind of romantic.
Yeah, definitely.
Agreed.
Aw.
Oh God, let's move on.
All right. Well, to go back into your show. So, I was curious how you two influence each other regarding just both your artwork. Like what's your perspective on that?
Well, I'll speak for my part, I guess. So I guess mine is always kind of long. It doesn't tend to be like one specific thing. I tend to need a long time to digest like ideas. And John, I will say that like, so I think it's okay for me to say this, is like, he's an outdoorsman, right? So there's a ton of like nature of just spending time like around, honestly, like even getting to know different kinds of like animal behavior. I mean, it's all sorts of landscapes, like there's all of that. And that's something that like over the years I've gotten to, I mean, I kind of grew up as a city kid, you know, so getting outside in the woods at first was like, I can have this like terrifying creative career, but not be scared. But then like, you know, I'm terrified of like a bear that doesn't exist in the back of the woods, you know, and just there's this like, I guess I've gradually kind of become more comfortable with being outside, seeing like the beauty of it. It's something that I've always been drawn to and have grown up a bit with. So all that to say, for me, like my artwork, I think has slowly over time reflected that, you know, animals have made their way more into my work, not in this specific show. This one was a little, the work in this show is a little bit more, I guess you could say some like spiritual things that have been happening for me, but I use that term kind of loosely. But I think it's the overall kind of, like a gesture of our relationship and some of the practices that come with being able to, you know, we're on the same team all the time. So it's like, there's a practice with that of like a bit of selflessness too, that you have to, there's a lot of compromising in a good way. I think compromising gets sort of a bad rap. And I'd say my work kind of, for me, has sort of been like a little bit about that. You know, my pieces tend to lean into the vessels part, but not completely. Like there are things in my work that are about totems, but I'd probably say I go into the vessels aspect of that 2-part show. And, you know, all of these like vessels, they're predominantly pools, but, you know, some of them are lakes and, you know, there's a lot of imagery and stuff. They're filled you know, or I mean, you could see them as empty, but they're generally filled. And that is something that is to a certain degree about our relationship, you know?
That's beautiful.
So that's my side.
Yeah, thanks, babe. Yeah, I think for me, you know, it's really, I'm thinking about that question. It's hard to answer that with like real specifics, I think, because it's what has become, I mean, truly a huge part of my life, sharing and finding commonality in a lot of things. And a lot of that commonality can be specifics, like, hey, this is a really cool, like, you know, amazing horse skull, like you could see behind, you know, Mia, like how cool is that thing? But then there's so much that I think that there's so many things that you know, I have found that both of us gravitate towards the substance of, and how we gravitate towards those things. I hope I'm being articulate, like, but there's a commonality there that I think has, for me at least, really kind of like fed more and more and more, and gone into, you know, when I was just making sculpture, that was fed by that like kind of long discussion, you know, and not, you know, and then with painting, you know, there's been, first of all, me kind of finding my feet just with a new technical experience, you know, which I learned a lot from, like, technically from Mia, you know. So there's that aspect of it, but then also, like, how do I don't know. It's interesting because it's like, how do I, you know, make an artistic statement with a medium that we're so intertwined in a lot of our creative process now, you know. So that, I guess that's why it's so hard to answer that, because I feel like these kind of discussions, like, you know, what are you doing? What are you interested in? What do you think about this kind of question and answer go in both directions. There is, like, for me at least, like a huge unity in almost like our creative processes together in a way. And I think there's, like, you know, I kind of say that carefully because I don't want to take away from, like, you know, what Mia is as an artist individually, because it's so powerful, so developed, and so, you know, so incredibly rich. But for me, like, they are intertwined. Those, you know, those experiences are intertwined, you know?
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you two have a very profound mutual respect for each other as people first, but then also, I mean, maybe the work, like both your work individually drew each other, you know, drew yourselves to each other, right? But then this sort of like conversation, it's kind of like being a musician, right? Although I'm not a musician, so maybe I shouldn't speak for musicians.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's
it's
good.
Yeah, it's kind of like being let's use a metaphor of a jazz musician, right? So if you're a jazz musician, and then the way you communicate to each other, jazz musicians generally have a very high technical skill level, right? So then the articulation is at a very high point, right? So the way that they can express themselves is probably more fluid than maybe a punk musician, for instance, right? Even though there might be a similar amount of heart in it, mm-hmm. to say the least, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a conversation. I think I like that the musician thing, because, like, I do play music, and it's a, you know, like,
why am I not surprised that you play music too?
It's so great, because it is, like, at its, like, to me, at its best, and it's most like almost like a spiritual plateau in music is when you're just really, like, having this conversation through music, you know. And to me, that's kind of what you're talking about, and that certainly, you know, happens. And at the same time, that there's times where, like, you know, either Mia or myself will be like, I need to, like, really do this by myself and get this idea articulated, you know, in a sculpture or on you know, the canvas, and then say, hey, okay, What do you think? You know, so there's different like iterations of the experience, you know?
Yeah,
Definitely.
I think like, you know, whenever you're working together, like if you've got that trust kind of set up, but also, you know, we're two individual artists, like we both, and we were before we met, I mean, that's just the case. And I think it's like one of the most considerate things you can do for each other is have those sort of clear boundaries when you need them sometimes, and not like strict boundaries, just, you know, boundaries are good, you know? Like
Totally.
especially when you're showing together and you're both, you know, working in the same medium. There's a lot of like crossovers that you know, we have to sort of lovingly watch a little bit, because our marriage is more important than our careers, you know what I mean? And so it and I know I speak for John for that too, is like, you know, being able to communicate through things, you know, that kind of takes precedence over every, you know, it needs to be at the top priority over like our artwork or egos or any of that kind of stuff.
Totally. Yeah. Well, Mia, I do have some questions for you about this sort of meditative quality, and as you're pointing to like the spirit sort of quality to your work, but I do want to ask John first about specifically how you see the confluence between all of your interests. I too am not trying to make this interview about me, but I too have a lot of interests, and I always try to find the confluence of it all. But I'm curious how you do it, because, you know, when we were talking on the phone, you do break dancing and rock climbing, and obviously you're a sculptor and a painter. And so I'm curious how you sort of like find your voice between all of those, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I think like the first thing I think about when you ask that is just joy, you know, the joy of the experience. Because that's what all those things are for me. You know, there's a joy, and I think that there's some commonality in that all of those things that we're talking about have a groundedness, like a physically touching the earth, you know, whether it's working with, you know, colored mud and paint, or whether it's having my hands and my body involved in sculpture. Breakdancing is certainly like a visceral experience all throughout. Climbing is as well. You know, music, playing music is as well. And they're just, I think that maybe for me, all those things are so richly experiential. And so, you know, people meditate in different ways. I do like sit and meditate, but I would consider each and every one of those experiences a form of meditation as well, because the focus becomes so singular and so quiet. And I guess I really gravitate towards experiences that kind of turn that, you know, that mind that, you know, wants to expand and grab onto things, and, you know, whether it's concerns or whatever it is, having those, you know, experiences that are focused, quiet.
Yeah.
You know, some of them are intense as hell, you know, but they have that quality.
And okay, and so how do you think that your experiences, the combination of all these experiences, has led you to painting?
I think that I would say that is part of the journey of me as an artist, is how I would answer that. Because, you know, sculpture is in my mind, you know, these are parts of a path. And so I think that I'd say that painting is just where the path has led me as a part of that conversation. I will say this, that if there's anything that makes somebody an artist in my, you know, I guess in my opinion, it's not the ability that they have when they start or anything like that. It is the passion to create. It's the passion to do it. Because if you have that, you're going to find a way. You always hear people say, I can just draw stick figures, you know, when you tell them you're an artist. And I'm like, dude, you you could learn to do anything you want to do. I'm a motivational speaker on Saturdays, ladies and gentlemen. You can learn to do anything that you want to do if you have the passion to do it. Jesus, I really do sound like a motivational speaker. I do mean it.
I think I found my my clip that I'm going to put in the beginning of the
Dude,
episode.
don't do that. No. No, but I think that's it. Is that like I part of my life, part of what grounds me is being able to create. And where I was at when I started painting was I had a wall of sculpture that I couldn't get around, and I needed to create. And so this became a part of the path. Sculpture has come back, and now I do that as well. But I have to have that in my life. If I didn't have painting, I think, it would have been some other form of walking down the path of like creation, expression, sharing, growing, learning through visual terms. Totally.
Yeah. And so now passing the torch to you, Mia, how would you say that you have a lot of hobbies as well, or how would you describe yourself?
Well, I'm a little envious that, because I know obviously I know John's hobbies and stuff better, but I do know that like you are a multidisciplinary artist.
Yeah.
And I actually, it's funny. I think the more I go and the more, the more I become an adult, the more I work through my issues. It's true.
As we all are working through our issues.
Yeah, exactly. Mine, I think so both my parents were entrepreneurs. My grandparents were 3 out of 4 were all entrepreneurs. Like, I come from a long line of people making money off of what they do for themselves. And that is like in the fabric of who I am to a certain degree. And it's actually not always healthy, I'd say. I'm not going to advocate workaholism in artists. Like most artists already are too far down that road anyway. And so I think like the more I go, the more myself, quote unquote, is starting to untie from that definition of being an artist. That was such like I don't know. There's something in that of like, I'm going to define myself this way. And when you stop kind of defining yourself all the time, I think it kind of opens things up to like, maybe I'm just a Mia, maybe it's not an artist. And so I
want to be a Mia.
Come on in. There's
I totally marry you, man.
What?
I'd totally marry him.
Like, here's wife number 1, Mia. Here's wife number 2, Mia. Yoshino.
Yeah.
Yoshino, you're a lot prettier than me.
Different vessel, but similar attitude. No.
There you go. Yeah. Vessel number 1. Vessel number 2.
Yeah.
Exactly. Anyway.
that little interjection on my part took a different turn that I didn't expect, but go on.
You're like, welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome to the
Friday
party.
Yeah.
No, anyway, so like I have no idea where we were.
Yeah, it's okay.
No, I do actually. I think like the more that I go, the more I'm open to being okay with like, hey, not every minute of the day has to be dedicated to self-betterment in a certain way that for me has been career oriented or art. Like I love art. I love painting. I love seeing. I love processing that way. And I do it a lot, but I know I have found that I'm missing out, by not having, just downtime sometimes. Even like hobbies can be so great because they just kind of give your brain a rest from the thing that you do for the majority of the week. It gives you inspiration, but also like, it's just, I read this thing at one point that, we don't have enough boredom in our life. I think you and I have talked about that once before, Yoshino, like that boredom is kind of important. And not that I think hobbies are boring. Like John said, I think they're another version of meditation. They're just, they're part of your life, and they make you hopefully happy and enriched. But it's something that I am coming more to grasp with, is like, hey, it doesn't have to be this like one trick pony all the time. Like it is. I mean, I exercise a bit, and I've always had these little things like, but they always end up tying back into painting. And I don't love that. Like as I get older, I'm like, I kind of don't want that anymore. Like I think being more well-rounded is actually has a longevity to it that it's more appealing to me.
So what do you do right now that you would say would add to that well-rounded experience?
So actually, meditation has become like a bigger part of my life, and that's sort of the things that go with that, I guess. That has become kind of, it's become pretty important. I'm getting back into a fitness routine. That's something that the pandemic didn't help me out a ton. And it's like, my sister and I joke, we're like, we are meant to be slow. Like, we're not like the really active people. So it's always a little bit uphill for me. Like, I'm like, choice between going outside and running or going into the studio. Like, I pretty much always pick the studio, and I'm trying to flip that right now. So exercise, running has been something I really enjoy. And then I do have a lot of like dumb crafts and stuff that just kind of keep my hands busy, because I am kind of a tinkerer, and I don't try to make them into anything else, but they are just fun for me of like, hey, I'm just going to like do this thing that isn't important. There's nothing writing on it. I'm not becoming a better person. There's no self-improvement except for just like, I enjoy this and it's downtime,
What do you two, both of you, think about that idea of self-improvement? Because I think that's just such a relevant topic within Western culture, is this idea of, you can relate it to like biohacking, to like any sort of self-improvement nonfiction book, to John, our consequential public speaker over here, motivational speaker over here. But what do you two think about that?
I like the Fight Club thing. So what does Brad Pitt say? Self-improvement is mental masturbation, or something like that. That's just what I thought about when you said that. Man, that maybe the difference between like being like mentally, spiritually, physically healthy and obsessive, the need to document it all the time, there's like a huge difference there. And I think we like are kind of in this place where everything kind of needs to be documented. And so my personal like path, it's all of a sudden, I'm not just thinking about experiencing the personal path. I'm thinking I need how many like Instagram followers are going to get that, and there's a thing with that I really, and it's interesting because, with a career of a visual artist, I have to think in terms of getting my work in front of people. That is just, I neither of us are, have inherited wealthy, we part of our career and just the practicality is this kind of, we have to think about marketing, but there's such an important balance, as Mia said so well, that, I have to be more than an artist. I have to do that. I have to define myself as just John, because otherwise it become like things become very like vapid, and just hollow. And that's easy to do. It's really, really easy to do. So, so self-improvement in terms of like what I'm truly doing to improve myself as a person and what I hold as valuable. And that's everything. but in terms of it really being a true experience and not, a reality TV show on Instagram. I guess that's what I am striving for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, John. I think too, like, you can make, just like anything else, you can make it be the thing, right? Like, hey, I am an artist, or I am a singer, or I am a wife, or it's true. Like you want to be those great things, or whatever they are, but like 100% sort of defining yourself by that of like, I am on this, self improvement. It's like damn the apocalypse. And I think that can become its own striving that can actually hurt, So I do think, if you're trying to, hopefully you're conscious and trying to be healthy and happy, like you are going to look for self-improvement. I mean, if you have any kind of like dissatisfaction or suffering in your life, like you are going to want to try to get rid of that or do something for it. And that tends to be self-improvement, which is great. But it can also become another, at least for me, I have to watch that of like, oh, I just did all this yoga. Look how awesome I am. Like I can do that, and I have to be really mindful of the fact of like, what's my payback for telling everybody that, like like John saying, the experience itself is improving me. That alone is enough, but self-improvement as like the defining moment of like how you're seen, or or the thing that might hold you back. I know people who like, they read so many self-improvement books, they're like miserable because everything's wrong. It's like I always feel like, if you're a doctor and you know what all the diseases are, you're looking for diseases everywhere. Like it's great, it's a good thing as a profession, but like I don't know that you always have to be like sifting the dirt that much, so it's like anything else, I think there's a balance for it,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I also think that there's something like being able to balance out our desires, like the things that we desire, and trying to peel back and understand like why we desire those specific things, and what is it about that specific thing, whether it be like wanting to have a career as an artist, and I mean, being able to find balance within that, because if you become laser focused, it can actually kind of tear you apart in a lot of ways if you don't get that specific outcome. And I think that we live in a culture that's so outcome oriented that it can be very toxic to the fabric of our well-being.
Yeah. I think too, like the intention, like what you're saying, I think is the root of what you're saying, is like the intention there, but not the outcome. Like you could go in kind of trying for something, but then if it doesn't work, it's almost like letting that go a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I did want to make a quick realization on your work specifically, Mia. And so, you were talking about like the sort of meditative aspects of painting, but then I also see that in the actual painting as well. I mean, you have monks in your paintings, and then you have nods to spirits and apparitions. And I guess I was curious what brought that about. And also, I mean, all of your recent paintings feel very spiritual. There's candles, and you have what are those called? Like the sky candles. Is that what it's called as well?
Oh yeah, the lanterns and stuff. And
yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, lanterns. And then the one that we're about to do has, like I said, a lot of pools, a lot of bodies of water. I don't know. I think it's something where I'm allowing that to come out. I don't always have I don't know what it is. Like, I'm not like, oh, I believe in this, and so this is going in. Like it doesn't work that way for me. Painting has never been that literal, or when it is, I'm not doing it super well. And so it doesn't tend to, yeah, it's not intentional, but it is something that like maybe like we were talking about with hobbies or with other parts of your life, like there is that influx that even subconsciously starts to come in. And I think, you know, I've sort of like over the years had a practice of like letting go of certain expectations. How do I say this properly? So I have like a you know, a lot of education around painting. I have a lot of background with it. I have a lot of like, you know, wonderful peers. I look at artwork all the time, but I have noticed that over the past few years, I have tended to sort of maybe trust my guts that it's okay for me to start showing imagery that is maybe more what I think about. That's not to say I didn't think about those things before, but I think because I've been doing this for like, gosh, I've been painting for 19 years. There is like a level of being, you know, I think I've said this before, like a well-formed glove, like my tools are now a little bit easier for me to control. And so those things like the harder, or just maybe more interesting subject matters are able to come out because I'm not thinking about the technical quite like I was. I mean, I still am all the time, but it's not the same. So I'd say other parts of my life have started to show up, and honestly, like they're not, like I said, they're, you know, there's a painting right now in the show we're about to do. It's called Afterlife, and it's a glowing pool with a help me out, a jumping beam,
diving board.
Thank you. A diving board. And, you know, I didn't have anything on the diving board the entire time. I was just like, oh, I love this. I've been painting this glow and it's really interesting. And I like that idea of these bodies, whether they're of water, but these containers that you can see as, for me, they're full, but you don't actually ever see the water in them. So, or you don't, you know, so they could also be empty, which I think it's interesting to work with things that show the opposites in the same object. See if I can get my head around this. Okay, so that painting, like as I worked on it, you know, I'm also going through like I have one grandparent left, and he's really, really close to, you know, he's like sort of like the dude in our family, right? And a lot of the reasons why I love the things that I love, like, are because of him. And, you know, he's probably going to pass away, you know, in the coming years. And it's been kind of on my mind. And it's funny how, like, just thinking about this emptiness and this fullness, like, as I processed, I ended up putting an older male figure on the diving board. And that's not really something that I set out to do. It's like my subconscious kind of like giving it space to come forward and be okay with those things, to allow them to show up. And honestly, like, I don't know that I'm always in control of it. But I get to watch and sort of paint, you know, and be like, oh, wow, okay, I must be thinking about my grandfather a lot. Like that stuff comes out, and it's this conversation that I guess I've just kind of stepped aside to let it happen. That's probably the best way to say it. That was really long-winded. Sorry.
No, that was great. That was great.
Thanks.
Yeah. It was very
question, really thoughtful question.
Well, it was very, it was very honest. And yeah, I think that's interesting. Like, just the idea of whether like whatever medium it is, right? You just learn how to articulate, or it's like learning a new language, right? And you learn the words, and then you understand how to put the words together, and then you can say something, and then that turns into some sort of poetry, hopefully, maybe not for everyone, but in this theoretical art talk that we're talking about. But, you know, it's interesting. Like, when I look at your work too, there's just like this, it's almost like, how in like Victorian era literature, how it's very expressive, and it seems like, you know, something that comes to mind is just like the devil's in the detail, you know, And it's just like each one of your paintings has this. It's also just interesting just to think about, like, with painting in general, how it's like you're working with these materials, and to be able to have some sort of voice with those materials just as a concept, I think is kind of extraordinary. And that could be any sort, it be painting, it'd be words, it could be, because like, what are words, right? Words are these symbols, and those symbols, unless you know the language, have no meaning. But if you know the language, then they suddenly do. And they, and some people may think that they're profound, and there's this collective consciousness of what profound would mean, right? So I guess I'm kind of like circularly just talking about things just in general, but it just kind of came up as to what you were talking about.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you. I mean, it's really thoughtful of you to like look through my work too, and sort of notice that, because it's, I mean, John and I have both had this of like, it's easy to, painting is not like one of the mediums that people, it's not the resounding one that we're communicating through as a culture, right? That's film. Predominantly, like as far as the visual ones go, it's film. And so but painting is slow. It captures time. Instead of stretching it out, it condenses it, right? And it's interesting to kind of to see when people are willing to slow down, because all we're working with is a rectangle, right? We go through. John and I talk about this a lot. Like there'll be some little area, and we're like, oh, that little area is amazing. Whether it's an abstraction or it's really beautifully painted or whatever, but you really are kind of conscious of the entire rectangle as your work, or whatever shape. But you're thinking about that, and yeah, there are a lot of details, not necessarily polished details, but there is a detailing to painting and to art making that can get really past,
but yeah. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
Oh no, well, I was just thinking about that word polished, like I think there's also just something interesting of something being not polished, something that's just kind of dull and beaten down or weathered, or I don't know. It's hard to articulate these things, right? Unless we're looking at like a specific like image or something like that. But I just think about that, like, I guess this idea of perfection comes up in perfectionism, right? And then it's like, that is such a objective or subjective perspective, right? Is like what is perfect, and if there's actually beauty in these things that we would consider imperfect, and maybe there's more beauty in that, right? More layers.
I think you like see the joy in Marx. I think like one of the things that I can see. I feel so fortunate to be in the perspective of like knowing the life that creates some of the images that you're talking about, like afterlife. And knowing like what all, to a degree is, what has gone into that, and then seeing that one moment it's done. It's not just the things that have gone into it, but it's expressing it in a way that's an open door for other people to like have their experience with, which is, that to me is like this really profound thing. Like, there's, it happens in like music a lot, whether it's just, an instrumental piece or something that, you get an experience out of that passage of music. And that the person who created it and played it has their personal experience, and there's such a depth in some of the pieces like that are in the show with Mia's work that I'm like I know where some of these come from, and I get to see where these come from and then how they're expressed in this one moment, which I love that. I like it's amazing. And then like the Marx itself, one of the things that there's so much to what you're expressing with any kind of work, but like with painting specifically, like how, beauty is enough in if it is something that you're just loving to paint, right? That is a complete statement. But then there's also, what's the narrative, or what's, that focus as well. And so there's a lot of approaches to a painting, to me, that make the painting like amazing. Like you can, how many apples have been painted in the world? There's still being fucking amazing apples being painted, and it's because that person is enjoying and relishing how they're putting those marks on, and I think like you were talking about seeing the marks on a painting, and just seeing like somebody's joy in the process. And also like when things are falling apart, there's a paying attention to what fell apart and what's like beautiful in the way it fell apart, and how to like embellish that, so that back and forth can be like and people pick up on that. I think, when I see somebody doing that, letting nature happen, and then like, our attempts to like organize that somehow and put our human experience on that, and then having nature and then our like perception put on that, the result can be like mind blowing, and it's not polished at all. It's not like some like polished, articulated, like finely done thing.
Yeah.
Can I jump into, I think it's really interesting because we're talking, and John and I are like across the yard from each other right now, right? Like my window faces his window. And there's three huge, well, it's really one sculpture, but it's three large pieces that are between us right now that are his huge sculptures, right? They're steel and they're rusted. They've rusted out in this really beautiful way that actually I was planned. John like planned for that rust. And I think it's interesting, like, since we're talking about perfection, we're talking about marks, like, and we've also been talking about some of the influences from the other one. Like for me, watching John, so there's this entire part of his career of, when you make outdoor sculpture, like you're dealing with elements, you're dealing with like animals that bury themselves into parts of sculptures, you're dealing with rust. There's like all sorts of these like really natural elements that can kind of happen that sometimes can be kind of like, finding like animals that have made nests and things can be a little weird, right? And it's something really interesting. Like I know for me, it has definitely influenced me of like, I do like having some of that roughness in work. I mean, there's this horse skull behind me, like that throws some people off, right? It's a weird thing to have in your home. We have lots of stuff like that. And that is very John. I'll say that, like, there is a love of things that are not quote unquote polished, as we're saying. And I think it's really, it's remarkable to see it showing up, especially like more and more recently in his work, of when you look at some of the passages and the paintings that he has, especially in this show that we're about to, release next week, is there are a lot of things in them where I find myself looking and being like, wow, there is a rawness to that in conjunction, standing right next to something very polished that makes you see both, rather than if the whole thing is, raw, or if the whole thing is polished. I feel like sometimes it can get hard to really enjoy that, but it's the things that are next to each other that I'm constantly noticing in his work that, and you can speak to that more, John, if you want, but it's really fun to know your background in this long lineage of seeing these materials that really can go kind of haywire sometimes, and how I think some of that has subconsciously kind of shown up in the way you handle paint. Like I've noticed you can dive really deeply into the sort of messiness of paint, which is its nature sometimes. Totally just like took over the interviewer. Sorry, Yoshi, no.
No, I love it.
That was my
John,
oh, John, are you going to say anything from
that? No, that was really nice. Thank you.
Oh. Well, I really appreciate you two, taking the time to do this. It was really great. I was wondering if you two have any advice for artists, creatives out there. I bring that question back from time to time.
you want to go first, John, or you want me to?
I had a really maybe just this, that like life will teach you what you need to do. If you're paying attention, it'll teach you what you need to do. You know, when I started down the path of being an artist, there's a baby chipmunk outside right now, like tiny baby chipmunk outside. It's really cute. Sorry, but when I just first started out, I was terrified to be like, okay, you know, I graduated from college with an art degree, and I'm like, fuck, what did I just do to my life? You know. And I talked to a really wise friend of mine, and he's like, you know, it's obvious you want to try this with your life. Do it until life tells you to stop. And that was such a simple statement, you know, and I have not experienced that yet. You know, there are times where I've had huge roadblocks of all sorts of types, financial, just life in general, creatively, all those kind of things. But, you know, there's always been a continued ability to keep painting, keep making, keep creating. And I've also increased as life is going on, that if I do need to stop at some point, it will become apparent. And that removes this huge block of pressure and ego that is so easy to fight in this life of being a professional artist. Yeah. If you can take that out of it, then you get to experience the path. You know, whatever that path is, you just get to really experience it instead of like desperately fighting to hold on to something, believing that that's the only way. You know, I would have never thought that I would be, you know, a painter as well as a sculptor, you know, and now I'm like, really, it is, you know, I love what I'm doing, you know, so.
That reminds me of that Rolling Stone song. You can't always get what you want, but you get what you need.
Yeah, that's truth there.
Yeah. Yesterday I was thinking about that a lot. And, yeah, so I don't know. It was interesting what you said right now. Mia, what's your advice?
Man, I think that's really good advice, what John just said. And, you know, for me, it's probably one of the things, I think it just depends on what stage we're talking to of an art, you know, somebody who's just starting versus somebody who's well in. But something that works for me is, you know, listen first, speak second, you know. So.
Yeah. That resonates.
Yeah, that one has helped me. So is when I remember to do it, which is not all the time, but when I do is usually when it, you know, there's a lot out there that is talking, so it's good to listen.
I agree.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for doing this.
Thank you so much, Yoshino.
Totally. Yeah.
This is great. Thanks so much, man. It's really good to talk to you and see your face too, man.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you too, man. Well, I hope everything goes well for the opening. It's going to be opening on next Friday, right?
Yep.
May 6th.
There we go.
We'll see.
I'll be there in spirit. You'll obviously be there, right?
Yeah, we'll be there.
Yeah, we'll be there.
Yeah. I like your shirt, by the way, Mia.
I know. I wore it today. I didn't even know that you were going to be recording, but I was like, I'm going to put it on anyway. I was like,
yeah.
All the time.
Yeah, no, I like it. All right. Well, take care of you too.
Hey, thank you so much.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right. Bye.